Oh, my mic is on, so that means if I can get some slides here, that would be great. It's the next presentation, telehealth, getting started in telehealth, exactly. Good. Okay, so everybody who wants to hear a little bit more about telehealth and telemedicine here, getting started in your practice, we're going to start now. I think out of respect for those who do want to listen, and since I'm easily distracted, I would appreciate if those who still want to hold a conversation maybe can hold that one outside. But this presentation is really about taking this now to the next level. Now, of those here in the audience, who of you, and I'm trying to see who's actually here and who's leaving, who of you is currently doing telehealth? Okay, there's one in the back. Okay, so then I'm guessing the others want to learn more here about it. And then I think there were some questions that came in earlier. And then, so I actually took a picture of that, and I'm not sure if the people are still in the audience here, but let me just quickly take a look at that image here. Or maybe they can bring it up, but probably not. Let's see here from today. There was one question about a comment that I made with regards to the ACO model. With the PCP, but how do specialists get paid? That depends on the design of the ACO. See me afterwards to talk more about that. Can you comment on the CMS recognition of value of RPM reimbursement issues? So CMS, as I actually just learned, finally published the final rule that I haven't seen yet, but a couple of months back or 6 weeks back, they had a draft that they're breaking it out into 4 different remote patient monitoring codes. So you get paid now for the monitoring, for the setup, and then also kind of for the chronic care management consultation. Recent literature demonstrates it is the independent specialty care physician that provides the best value in healthcare. Amen to that. How do we collect the financial and outcomes data to build on this theme? Are the tools and resources we can tap into via LUGPA? Many others in the industry here within the telehealth industry have recognized that there's more need for research, and so there's actually a group now called SEARCH, a Society for the Education and Advancement in Research in Connected Health, that has just been launched, searchsociety.org. They have holding their first event here in a few weeks on the West Coast. And I think there's more data, and then also if somebody wants to reach out to me from LUGPA to see if we can coordinate here, getting some research data to the LUGPA members. If you try to achieve this culture and have physicians who will not comply, how will you deal with that? You deal with that beforehand. It's actually how you set it up is what I've found. I guess Dr. Beeson would have maybe some more insights into when you reach that point and you have made that first bad impression. And then there's some physicians who just, or some people, not necessarily physicians, who would just not change. But what I have found is that engagement from the very first minute and the first get-go is really what is important in order to get people engaged. And oftentimes you need to find out what are the root causes. Is it just a categorical dismissal of telehealth will not work for me, or I don't want to learn it, I don't think it's appropriate? You got to find out the root causes and then get them engaged in that process. Okay, if we can get the slides back up here, I'll get back to. It's up there, it's not up here, so I'm flying blind here. Getting started in telehealth. If we could have the slides here back on my monitor, that would be really helpful. Right now I see the 10th anniversary, because we've got those two here. So, why do we need a telehealth strategy? Why do we need a telehealth business plan? How do you go about designing the workflows and selecting the technology? And then who is involved in the launch and in the support? And so in the next steps that I just mentioned is, again, the idea, why do we need a telehealth strategy? Why is that important? And I think you already heard it a couple times this morning. It's about what is your story for your practice? Where is your passion? How do you want to achieve, find the calling again? And I think that's what's important, and that's what a telehealth strategy gives you. If you just get started with something that is opportunistic because you saw a sales presentation by a vendor, or maybe your EMR has that, that in itself, it might be a good opportunity to kind of dip your toe in the water and get experience. But what I have found, it becomes then not sustainable and oftentimes also not scalable. Oftentimes it also hinges just on the efforts of one or a few physicians who are passionate about it and want to make it work, but they're kind of operating under the radar screen, and they just go out and buy it. Again, depending on the size of your organization, sometimes that can happen, and you can do that. So why do you need a telehealth strategy? Again, I just repeated these slides because but we just went through that. And if I want to go back here, I probably, push this button. And so the key elements to telehealth success, as I've mentioned verbally, but I don't think I had the slide up here, is it's about the management of the organizational change. And that was the second action item that Dr. Beeson also mentioned here. We need to really manage the organizational change. We need to design the right workflows very consciously, and therein lies, I think, an exciting and unique opportunity to really redesign how we want to deliver healthcare differently in the future. If our current processes are not optimized, and getting somebody involved there that can help in mapping out the right processes and then inserting the technology at the right places so that they're not in the way, but that they're conducive, that's very important. And then 10% of my efforts, of my energy when I work with healthcare organizations to implement their telehealth services and programs are focused on the technology, because it is available, it's very feasibly priced these days, and it's reliable and secure already. If you have technology and workflow, if you do not work on the organizational change, then you've got, I don't know if you can read it, you have unfulfilled potential. I think I have a laser pointer here. If I can, there's a pointer, and then, there. Oh, it's green, nice. So I have unfulfilled potential when I have only when I don't have management of organizational change. If I don't focus on the workflow, but I pay attention to the change, I have disciplined chaos, but since it's not organized. If I have no technology, then I have inefficient progress, and you have success when all three elements are present in your strategy. So, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. You've probably seen that multiple times as leaders in neurology. And this is also not unique to telehealth, but it's very important to remind yourself that you need to provide continuous executive and leadership support in order to make a telehealth program work. And a telehealth program I define as a series of different services. And you can, as I mentioned before, you can look at follow-up visits, you can look at inbound telemedicine, you can look at remote patient monitoring. So there's numerous use cases that you can explore and integrate. But you need to have the continuous executive support for it. It needs to be very consciously managed, the organizational change management, and you need to have a very disciplined and structured launch. Very consciously, and having the launch support there from a technical perspective as well as one from the procedural perspective. And so it's the first two items that a telehealth strategy really addresses. And so here's your recipe. You first need to create a vision. What does telehealth mean for organizations? Why do we want to do it? What are we achieving here? One of the workshops I do with my clients is I have a list of 30 different motivations of why an organization would do telehealth. Be more competitive, recruit more talent. And so with these insights then, what is important to your organizations? What do you really want to do for the next 2-3 years? And that why is very important, because it's a key ingredient. It's the first ingredient into change management, is to really convey and communicate the why, so that you don't get people at the very end or when you're 2/3 into the development effort that I just don't want to budge, and they don't want to be it because they weren't involved in crafting the why at the beginning, is what I find is often the case. How will your patients be better off? Again, don't really put the patient front and center. We've been taught that over and over again in healthcare, and sometimes we may lose sight of that. And then, as Dr. Beeson said, good luck changing anything if the patients are seen as a necessity. You want to link it to your strategic plan. Hopefully you do have a strategic plan, and if so, you put a lot of effort into your strategic plan. And so you want to make sure that your telehealth strategy aligns with and actually supports and enables the realization of your organizational strategy. For me, they go hand in hand. I have yet to see a strategic plan or a list of strategic objectives where I cannot make a direct case where a telehealth service can help them to achieve the goals that are set forth in the strategic plan. And the idea behind that is to get everybody engaged and really fully behind it to support the telehealth program. And then create a roadmap. Let people know where specific services are at on the roadmap. What services will you launch, and how will the scope grow? You said, okay, this year we're just going to focus on remote patient monitoring as surgical follow-up because we see an opportunity there. It's one that only involves a third of our urologists, and so we're just going to get started small just to get our experience, and then we're going to grow. So that's a valid strategy, and it doesn't take long. I mean, it's not a month-long effort or not even a days-long effort. You can do it in half a day. It's not rocket science, but you got to do it, and you got to communicate it, and you got to live by it, or you got to change it if you have different insights. So the inspiration can come from, well, how can you use telehealth to improve patient satisfaction? What are you hearing from your patients? If you don't hearing anything, how can you find out what your patients are thinking? Ask them, would you like to see me from home for the follow-up visit rather than that? If that is reimbursable, again, therein lies the challenge, as I presented in the obstacles that not all payers reimburse for telehealth. Better health outcomes. How can we really leverage this technology with all the ideas that we've seen here in today's presentation? How can we achieve better health outcomes for our patients? And then what's the benefit in that? Looking ahead is what are some of the payment models that we can tap into or be eligible for or need to prepare for what's coming down the pipe here? How can we lower the cost of care? How can we, and then paramount, and that's why I put it in the center, how can we improve the provider satisfaction with all our efforts here? And then you build out a telehealth roadmap. You pick from the outbound telehealth services that are here listed on the left, whether it's interactive patient care. Maybe it is just teleeducation. I know of one specialty where the physicians are recording pre-recorded messages, professionally recorded. Videographer comes in, or they go to a studio, but ideally it's done somewhere in the clinic. And they record a short 5-7 minute spots of standard things that you say to patients when they get diagnosed or when you prepare for surgery. And it's very personal. It optimizes your time, and you don't get burned out delivering the same message, 37 times a week. And it's an opportunity to give patients access to that through a patient portal, and they can review it with a spouse. So all the tips. So there's great opportunities that go beyond what we think of telehealth as this interaction. It's delivering care at a distance. How can you deliver care at a distance by taking advantage of the different technologies that are out here? Remote patient monitoring, post-surgical, we talked about that, post-surgical, maybe chronic disease management aspects, store and forward then, and then teleeducation, as I just mentioned, and then the patient portal, giving patients maybe access to scheduling or rescheduling. Those are some of the demands I'm seeing in some circles, although I currently think those are more of a red herring. Patients want to have more control over what they're doing, and it doesn't have to be necessarily self-scheduling, but they want to have more interaction when they do that. And so based on this roadmap, and you can then pick what does make sense for your organization, where can you get started, and that then forms your telehealth strategy. The next level down is to look for other proven tools, and so what I've looked for, because I've worked also with a number of startup organizations over the years here, is to build your telehealth business plan. Again, it doesn't have to be a 50-page document. It doesn't have to be developed over 3 months. It doesn't require an MBA to do it. And what's more important than the actual plan is the planning process. And again, that's part of the approach to achieve organizational change management, to achieve the buy-in, to manage the organizational change by creating the buy-in, by giving people a voice, by getting their input. even if it's just in a 90-minute session on some Friday afternoon or even on a Saturday afternoon. And so the effort of planning is very important. And it's not about the document. It's not about creating a 5-pound document that you print out or something that the CEO can put on the shelf in the 3-ring binder or these days in a presentation. That's not what it's about. But here are the building blocks that you can look at and the different chapters that you need to look at. Organizational assessment. How ready are we? How have we dealt with change in the past? How interested are people in telehealth and remote patient monitoring, interactive patient care? Are they excited? Are they wary of it? Have they had bad experiences? Do they have questions? Where's your organization at? And then also, since this is about organizational change, what is your capability to manage organizational change? Should you invest in that effort first? So just doing that investment. Environmental assessment. What does our state say with regard to Medicaid and commercial insurers with regard to telehealth, telemedicine insurance? Are we close to some other state lines? Would we draw patients from other states that we need to interact with, and do we need to be licensed there? What's pending in the legislature here, in your state legislature? So just look at the different environments of what are others doing? Are there competitors out there? Is there maybe another medical center, academic medical center or larger health system that is doing telehealth and telemedicine? So patients are already aware of that, and you can just say, well, it's just like they are doing, we're doing now as well. So can you tie into that? So really understanding that environmental assessment is important. And then define what are you going to be doing with regards to organizational change management. How will you structure the governance, and who owns it, and how will you provide support? There's some level of technical support that's needed, and a lot of the second tier, third tier support can be handled by the vendors, but nonetheless, technology breaks down, and how can you add this to the list of responsibilities that probably your current technical support has, and what will it take? Just making that conscious decision. So this could be a 10-minute effort to just write it down, how you will do that. What's your roadmap here from the strategy, and what's your first set of telehealth services or first telehealth service that you want to launch? How will you market that? Very important and unique with every different service. How will you let patients know that that option now exists? And then a financial analysis, important. How much do you want to invest in this? Do you just bootstrap it, pull it off yourself? Are you going to leverage external help from consultants? What's the investment going to be? What are you looking for generally for return on investment? What's the implication of not doing anything? If you not do anything for the next 5 years, will revenue erode? Will market share erode? What's the cost of not doing anything? So all of that goes into that aspect here. And then an overall risk analysis and mitigation strategies. Okay, what can go wrong? Okay, what are the challenges here? Other projects, other initiatives that might have a bearing on the success of a telehealth program. And so after you've done that, now you're ready to putting, as I say, the cart behind the horse, because first you want to define the cart. You want to make sure that you define what you're going to do before you decide on the horse, which is the technology that's going to pull the cart. So the first thing that is critical is to really think about the workflow first. Don't get sucked in by what's available to you technically. Don't just buy a telehealth solution that you see in a great presentation of. Salespeople now have been in this for 5 to 8 years or some even longer, and they're getting really good at making it sound really great. But what's important is, and what I have found, that every organization has a very different culture. And every organization is unique, and so you really need to sit down, and again, it's part of the organizational change management. You need to sit down with everybody who's going to be affected by telehealth and telemedicine and ask them, what is the ideal workflow? what do we want this to look like? When we reach out to the patient at home, how do we want to make sure, as a physician, I don't want to call the patient and then the patient is not ready, so how can we tee the patient up just like we do now in the waiting room? And so there's all these questions that oftentimes get overlooked, and then telehealth fails, as Dr. Beeson mentioned. 70% of change fails because it was not given proper thought to it. So you need to ask yourself, how do you want to deliver the service? What would this look like? And then you go and look for the technology. So it's about people and processes, who's doing what at what time, who, what, when, where, and how. A great starting point is actually to map your current workflow. And there, every time when I do this, there's a great amount of insight that is gained, because people, just as we mentioned before, that people don't know the names of the receptionists, but people don't know what other people are doing, or how much effort actually goes into getting the patient ready into your exam room. And how much work is put into that, and understanding that already provides a lot of great insight, and it forms that bond, it forms that positive culture in which you then can implement the change. The other telehealth considerations here for those specific subsets of interactive patient cares, IPC, and remote patient monitoring, RPM. For IPC, you need to think about how we're going to handle scheduling and rescheduling. How do we synchronize the workflows, meaning when is the patient ready, when is the physician ready, can we get them together? What are our contingency plans if the video breaks down, if the audio breaks down, if there's background noise, if there's an emergency? So thinking through those things. And then for remote patient monitoring, the whole process of how do we enroll patients, how do we set it up, how do we train them, how do we monitor, how do we escalate if there's, so if we see some results from the remote patient monitoring that we don't like, how do we intervene? What's our protocol here? And then how do we recover the device? How do we get the device back and then refurbish it and then put it out? So there's specific standardized workflows around those two particular areas that you can leverage here and that you can look at. It's not about the technology. It is about the workflow and change management. The basics, you got to have a solution that's highly usable, that's reliable, and that's secure. Oftentimes get the question, is FaceTime secure? Well, technically yes, but legally it's not HIPAA compliant because they don't sign a business associate agreement, a BAA. And so you're better off going with solutions that do sign a BAA, like Microsoft Skype or Zoom, again, if you just want to use a basic video chat. A lot of EMR platforms are now integrating some interactive patient care video-based telehealth into their solutions. They often have some horrendous workflow issues, especially on the patient side. They're optimized a little bit more for the physician, but they're not optimized for the patient experience. And so you're making the patient jump through a lot of hoops, and I encourage you to actually see it through the patient's eyes. And again, that's why I say develop the workflow first before you select the technology to see if that, because the way you would design it for the patient is like the patient gets an email link, clicks on it, and is in the system. That would be the ideal experience. But if that solution cannot be provided by that vendor, then you might be better off to look for a different solution. So does it meet your needs? Is it a sustainable business? There's a lot of startups around, and we'll see a lot of consolidation as in any new industry over the next years. So you want to make sure that you're betting on the right horse here, and making sure you go with a solution that will be around in 3-4 years, and that they also have a fair pricing and don't take advantage of you, which some of the bigger venture capital funded organizations have really held healthcare organizations hostage with their plans, and then administrators rightfully got very angry after a while, after the benefits were not achieved, and so they didn't see the return on investment. Because the technology really has changed. So I couldn't have stood up here 10 years ago and said it's not about the technology, because back then it was about the technology. It was low reliability, poor usability. It was very expensive to buy and very costly to maintain. But today we have, and this is just one subset of vendor logos here that I dove a little bit deeper in for one of my clients. And it's they have great reliability, high usability, A lot of them are relatively inexpensive, especially if you're seeing, I don't know, 50 patients or even 10 patients a month over them. They're virtually maintenance free and have a great degree of usability. There's different markets, different leaders here. So I did a chart of completeness of their interactive telemedicine or interactive patient care vision. And this axis is the ability to perform cost effectively. And so there's a lot of niche players around here, and that's what I said. What we're going to see over the next 10 years is a more specialty solutions for certain medical specialties or certain interaction modes. We have a few visionaries here. We have some challengers that are cost effective and have a good vision but cannot execute that. And then we have just at that point when I did that snapshot, just a handful of leaders in the field, and those are the ones that would be good to look at. But the other ones are the ones to keep an eye on. But it is a broad market, and once you are armed with the knowledge of what you want, what are your needs, what are you looking for, then it's much easier to go to a trade show like the American Telemedicine Association trade show in the spring. And go or to HIMSS, or HIMSS is getting a bigger. HIMSS is Healthcare Information Management Society. They have a growing portion of telehealth vendors as well, or go to your existing EMR platform and assess them. So then last but not least, and very important, so you've got the strategy, you've got the business plan, you get your workflows designed, you decided on your technology. So now the question becomes, how do you operationalize it? So who do you need to actually launch and support it? And there, you really need a multidisciplinary team to do it right. You need somebody who has got some good project management experience to manage it, a workflow design. Again, these are in smaller organizations, in smaller teams. Those are played by multiple people. This doesn't mean we need to have here that many people on the team, but we need to have that expertise and that background here. So project management, workflow design, telehealth technology expertise are some of the aspects that you need to really truly assess and design your good system. And then you need to have very important is that this is clinician-led. This needs to be led by a physician within the organization, because it is, again, about the patient and it's about the clinical experience. And then you need to also have expertise in operationalizing that, which all of you have. But again, it's another responsibility that those individuals would have. And that was the wrong. And then you can use this blueprint here for a telehealth launch process. So so now that you've got your strategy, so when you look at a particular service, so let's look, for example, at follow-up visits with patients that are suitable. So what's the strategic case here? Well, it helps us to serve our patients better, make it easier for them. What's the business case? Okay, for certain payers, we can get reimbursed. What's the clinical case? Yes, we can deliver the same level of care over video if it truly is just a follow-up visits where we go over some test results and we discuss some options or what the next steps are. Then you design the workflow. Okay, so how do we let the patient know? How do we offer it to the patient? So that's part of the plan. And then how do we then actually initiate the visit and do that? So we do that visioning. Then we decide on the technology and how do we operationalize it? How do we do the scheduling, the synchronization? Then you launch a proof of concept. The goal of a proof of concept is to validate your assumptions, and that's very important. Don't just start a pilot and say, we're going to try this with one physician for 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 3 months. Let's see how that goes. A good proof of concept is about listing your assumptions, determining the measures, how you will validate that those assumptions are validated or invalidated, and then launching your pilot, and then letting your pilot run as long as it takes in order for you to have confidence that your assumptions are validated. And then you need to manage the organizational change when you scale it and implement it, meaning that now it's beyond just one physician or whatever your scalability measures and variations are. Here are some ideas for some revenue models. Direct-to-consumer cash pay is a viable model in some markets where you can offer patients access to it. There may be opportunities around more sensitive topics or men's health, where maybe men are not as willing to come into the clinic and rather just do it in the privacy of their home. Have an interaction there that feels more anonymous than going to a clinic and getting into a waiting room. So there's opportunities there, and with a lot of patients now having a health plan that has a high deductible, may as well just spend the $49 on a visit or whatever you want to price it as. You can have business-to-business retainers with a fee-for-service component. So here you have the ability to offer urology-specific services to other businesses. And depending on your area of expertise, that might vary. That may be actually employers, where you offer yourself up as part of their employer-sponsored plan. Those might be wellness clinic, men's health clinics, whatever. There's going to be more and more new business models being developed in healthcare here over the next 5 to 10 years that are really going to shape up healthcare. And so as these emerge, you want to align with them, and you want to have them and then do it maybe as a fee for service. And then reimbursement. Medicare, you can get reimbursed, but it has its limitations. Patient needs to be in a clinic. Doesn't have to be your clinic, but needs to be in a clinic location or in a nursing home. Medicaid, it's state dependent. Often the answer is yes. And commercial insurers, it depends on the insurers and also on the states. But more and more insurers are seeing the benefit of it. And Medicare Advantage plans, for example, are also seeing the benefits. Working with one organization in Washington that is actively pushing, so a Medicare Advantage plan actively pushing telehealth and telemedicine reimbursement. So get in contact with your payers and lobby. And again, that's something I think where LUGPA also can greatly help. Maybe at the next meeting, convene a breakout session here where people who are doing telehealth can share their experiences, identify some roadblocks so that LUGPA then can act as your in your best interest to removing those and maybe negotiate reimbursement for telehealth services in the urology field if a case can be made. And then also tying back into the research, as I said earlier, as one person asked here. And then telehealth support. Who's going to provide you telehealth support? So you need operational and technical support. You need a well-designed service. And if it is well-designed, then it requires actually little to no support. 3/4 of all problems that are encountered are related to training. People have either not received training, or they didn't pay attention, or it's been 3 months since they received the training. And so having an ability to self-train, to do just-in-time training. I have sometimes laminated cards next to the telehealth technology where people can just quickly look at what was the workflow, what were the steps that I needed to take. And so the technical problems that exist are mostly related to network and oftentimes, what did one chart say in one help desk that I visited? 83% of all problems are solved by rebooting. So, and contingency plans are the key here, again, so that the patients don't have a bad experience, that the providers, that the clinicians don't have a bad experience. It's important that you have contingency plans, that if something goes wrong, you have a backup plan. Can we go over phone? What's our process for rescheduling? Those kind of things you need to make part of your telehealth support strategy. Okay, with that we covered why you need a telehealth strategy, why what you would put in a telehealth business plan, how you design the workflows and technology, who you need to launch and support it. And so putting this together as a visual is you've got your program strategy, your business plan, your technology strategy, and then your methodology of how you launch the different services. Again, feel free to save the slides on your iPads here that I think are still out, or contact me for a copy of that. Again, that's a nice visual that summarizes the things you need to put in place. And it doesn't have to be big, but going through the steps, it's the effort, it's the activity of actually doing it that is essential. There's some resources out there. There's telehealth resource centers. If you Google that, National Resource Center, National Telehealth Resource Centers.org or something like that. There's 11 regional resource centers around the nation. They're depicted here on this graphic. So you can contact them for some advice. They oftentimes have free consultations. It's funded by a grant, a 3-year grant each 3 years from HRSA. So they have some money available to do some free consultation, some initial free consultation. Great resource. American Telemedicine Association that I mentioned. There's consultants and obviously also the vendor to be used as resources. And with that, I don't see any questions here on the screen, but if somebody wants to step up to a microphone and have a question, I'd be happy to try to answer it.
Thank you, Mr. Milaster. That was illuminating. I have one of my young partners interested in this, and we've began exploring it. It appears that the technology to do kind of a direct telemedicine thing is about $25,000 startup. And I'm not interested in turning a 3-minute office visit into a 20-minute encounter. But what is intriguing are expanding essentially into a national urology practice where you could go direct to consumer and have appointments scheduled, and also something like a blog or something where people could access it and then you could sell advertising. What are the legal barriers to doing something like that?
You mean the legal barriers to the last, or? Well,
to either, really. I mean, if a patient, you'd mention state licensing laws, but if a patient voluntarily engages in a commercial enterprise, essentially we're selling information or expertise. Are there legal barriers to that? And then the blog thing. Okay.
So for legal matters, that's why I assigned myself with the team. This is Dr. Joe McMenamin, MD and JD, who is our telehealth legal expert. And so as an engineer and as a visionary, I like to think about all that's possible, and he tells me what is not possible. So if I can get your contact information, I'd be happy to ask him about that opinion. I was surprised to hear, if I could hear correctly, and the speakers are set up in a way that I don't hear you as clearly here on stage, so I apologize for that, is the ability or the cost point that it would, you said it's $25,000 of an investment to set up a system, is what you determined?
Well, we have a contract with the prison system, and they wanted to do this, and we looked into it because the cost was on our part, and it was about $25,000.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you. Another question? Yes.
Could you just briefly summarize what are the proposed or now finalized Medicare payment for 2019, or if they have any proposal that may be for the subsequent years?
Yes, a good question, and I mentioned that at the beginning. So remote patient monitoring is the one thing that is really new this year, is where they've broken down the code into 4 different codes. For remote patient monitoring, there's one separate code for the startup of a remote patient monitoring service. There's another reimbursement code for the ongoing. And then there's 2 others that are more with the clinical management. I haven't seen the final rule yet and the amounts of what changed, but that was what was proposed about 8 weeks ago and put up for commentary. I know that CMMI, the Center for Medicare Innovation Group, is really looking very hard, creating innovative models there. For example, working with the state of Maryland on some innovative models that also incorporate telehealth and telemedicine aspects. And so they're really trying to work around the fringes to avoid violating the statutes, but still allowing patients to come. So I think we will see more coming out of Medicare, and hopefully one of these days, one of the bills that gets introduced from both sides of the aisles repeatedly will make it through Congress to remove those originating site barriers, as they're called, meaning where the patient is located from the statutes, so that we have much more opportunities to get reimbursed from Medicare.
My question is the vendors. You've shown on the screen a list of vendors, also resources that we
Yes.
can contact. But the one I liked best was the matrix you had that had
Yes.
the little bubbles, but you didn't put the vendors on there. Can you share that with us, or is that proprietary to Ingenium?
Well, it is proprietary, but it's what I'm more concerned about is that so I shared that with one of my clients, and I developed that for my client proprietarily. But my real concern is that when I put this up and a vendor gets it in their hands, I'm afraid of a lawsuit, also by the Gartner Group. So yeah, let's have a beer tonight and let's see what happens. And
Thanks.
yeah, thank you. Good. With that, I thank you for your interest. I've got some information material on my table just right outside the door. If you want to grab it, feel free to also reach out to contact me. I'm always available for a little chat if I can help you in your practice to whatever extent you would like some help. I'd be happy to talk about this. And I'm looking forward on seeing how telehealth really has evolved here maybe over the next year. And I'm hoping to continue to work on the LUGPA level really on giving them some ideas on how they can influence policy as well as insurers. I think was where the crux lies on really reimbursing for the use cases that you think make the most sense for your urology practice. I hope you found this helpful. Thank you for coming to the session, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.